Do you ever think about taking a shortcut and actually do it? Who hasn't? Your feet are tired, you're running late. You think, what's the big deal? It'll be quick. You're all alone too. Breaking a sometimes unspoken rule, the rule of twos. Don't walk anywhere alone, especially after dark. But you figure it'll only be this once. It's not that far. You'll be home before you know it. And next time, you'll remember the buddy system. But what if there is no next time? Some rules aren't meant to be broken. They're created to protect us. Because even in a safe college town, monsters are waiting for that one moment that you slip up. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. Now today I've got an Evil Minds episode. That it was the intro you just saw. And these cases are a bit darker. We dive a little deeper into that darkness, but you're still going to get all the information, the thorough research that you're used to in my other videos. Now, let me quickly say something to you, friend to friend, or maybe parent to parent. Do you ever notice when things start small, they seem like not a big deal? Could be a bill here, a fee there, but then it all adds up to credit card debt and it starts following you around like a shadow that just won't leave. And when things finally calm down, it strikes again, higher interest rates and then bigger minimums that you can't afford. And it seems like it never goes away. And you're getting that constant stressful feeling. And I've been there. I'm actually there right now. And that is where our sponsor, PDS Debt, comes in. Whether it's credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, PDS Debt builds a custom plan for your specific situation. They go beyond the numbers to actually understand what's happening in your life, and they craft a personalized path forward with no minimum credit score required. The goal is simple. It's to help you save more, pay off your debts faster, and start putting money back where it belongs, and that is in your pocket. For us, it snowballed fast. I had a baby last year, there were medical bills, then we renovated a 1940s house. I swear those videos are coming. We teared down walls, we rebuilt rooms, painting the exterior this month. And it's just one thing after another. And I bet you know how it goes. You grab your credit card at the last minute because it's convenient, and there's vet visits and pediatrician appointments, surprise oil changes, and then there's just something wrong with something in the kitchen and it's swipe, 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 and I'll just deal with it later. But then the charges start to stack up. PDS Debt is legit. They are an A+ rated business on the Better Business Bureau, thousands of 5-star reviews on Google, and a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. And there's a reason for that. PDS Debt has helped hundreds of thousands of people get out of debt. And PDS Debt understands your specific scenario and will help to provide alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. It's how I got debt-free and I continue to, and that's why I continue to talk about it to help others. So don't wait for debt to make its next move. You're only 30 seconds away from being debt-free. All you have to do is get your free debt assessment and find the best option for you right now at pdsdebt.com/Kimber. That's pdsdebt.com/Kimber. And I want to thank PDS Debt so much for making this video possible. Now, let's get back into the case. When I left off, I was talking about shortcuts, walking alone, especially after dark, college towns and monsters lurking in the shadows. And I truly wish that I could say it's surprising, but I think most of you are well aware that bad things happen everywhere, even in places that are deemed safe and should be safe, like a college campus. And after the Idaho case and the pure evil that is Bryan Kohberger, I think you know that illusion of safe campuses has been completely shattered. Maybe he got inspiration from the evil you're going to hear about in this case, because sadly, there has been many like it. And as a matter of fact, everything that happened here in 1998 was only 2 years following the disappearance and murder of Kristin Smart, a 19-year-old Cal Poly student who disappeared in May of 1996 after going to an off-campus frat party all alone. She didn't know anyone there. She attempted to walk back to her dorm room. She passed out in a nearby front lawn. And I'm going to be mentioning that case in this story which you may be familiar with since it happened in the very same city that this similar tragedy took place, San Luis Obispo, California, and at the same college, California Polytechnic State University, but I'm getting way ahead of myself already. So let me start with the walk home alone. It was a regular Thursday night in a sleepy college town on the coast of California. Just before midnight, 20-year-old Cal Poly student Rachel Newhouse takes the Jennifer Street Bridge like she's done many times before. It's safe. There are streetlights, a little coastal breeze, the kind of shortcut you take because your feet already know the way. It's like muscle memory. On the bridge, it's quiet enough to hear shoes on concrete. Nothing dramatic, just the college town soundtrack that usually fades when the bar is empty at the end of last call. Rachel keeps moving, and all of this is familiar to her. It's what the bridge was made for. It's a pedestrian overpass providing a safe way to cross the railroad tracks below. It's narrow. It's barely wide enough for a car to fit on its path. It's high above the ground, and you take stairs to access it. It's got somewhat of a cage on top so that no one can jump or fall from it. And as I said, it's safe. This town itself was pretty isolated. There wasn't a lot of through traffic, and most people who lived there were students or recent graduates, and there certainly was not a lot of crime in this area. It was actually the safest college out of the 23 state universities in California when it came to violent crime at the time. The bridge connected Oso Street with Jennifer Street, or as students knew it, the bridge connected the downtown bars to the residential area where many students had off-campus apartment homes, including Rachel and her roommates. She lived in a rental house off Gerda Street, about a 40-minute walk from downtown, and about a 20-minute walk once you get off that bridge. Rachel should have been home before 1 a.m., but when her roommates return in the early morning hours of Friday the 13th, she's nowhere to be found. We can't possibly know what her roommates were thinking at the time, but maybe they were tired. Maybe they had been drinking. Those are reasonable things to assume, and then they just went to bed. By the next morning, Rachel was still not home. And she hadn't reached out to anyone to let them know what happened to her the night before. And I know I haven't told you what was going on before Rachel walked home alone that night. That's going to be important. But for now, her roommates are checking with friends. They're trying to figure out if Rachel spent the night at someone's house. Maybe she got a ride home. She was casually seeing a coworker of hers. She was a hostess at San Luis Obispo Brewing Company. She was seeing Adam Olson, and she was expected to work that Friday evening. So they thought maybe she was with him and he would give her a ride later after her classes. But that's the thing. Rachel didn't show up for any of her classes on Friday, and that was unusual. But again, maybe her friends and her roommates were thinking she had a long night. She slept in, so they still weren't worried. Maybe a little concerned, but they were probably thinking they would hear from her soon. But then Rachel didn't show up for work either. And that's when the alarm bells really started to go off. That meant she wasn't with Adam Olson. He hadn't seen her, and she wasn't the type to skip out on her job, even though she'd only been working there for 2 months. She was a reliable employee, and now her roommates were more concerned than ever. They were convinced that something horrible had happened to their friend, so they called the police. Now, usually an adult not coming home or not making it to work, someone with access to a car, even though Rachel's was still parked at her friend's house, that wouldn't necessarily be too big of a deal for police. We know the drill. They'll say, she's an adult, she's allowed to disappear. But it hadn't been that long since another Cal Poly student didn't come home after a night out. As I alluded to, 19-year-old student Kristin Smart. At this point, she is still missing from 2 years earlier. So to understand the fear that had enveloped this college town, I at the very least have to explain what happened to Kristin. Her case was unsolved at the time, and the mystery lingered. Parents had just started to trust that their teens would be safe at the school, and then Rachel goes missing. So let's back up just a bit to May of 1996. Now I'm going to summarize the agony that not only Kristin's family went through, but all throughout San Luis Obispo as well. On the evening of Friday, May 24th of 1996, the very start of Memorial Day weekend, Kristin Smart went off to an off-campus birthday party near the Cal Poly campus. She headed to the party alone after her friends declined to join her, which, by the way, that still bothers me, but I get it. Maybe they were busy, maybe they had other plans, or just no interest in going. Even though not of legal drinking age, Kristin had been consuming alcohol. And then later she attempted to leave the party and walk back to her dorm room, highly intoxicated. And she never made it. Instead, in the early morning hours of May 25th of 1996, around 2 a.m., other partygoers, a guy, Tim Davis, and a girl, Cheryl Anderson, found the freshman, who was actually strikingly tall. She was 6'1" and blonde. Quite a sight to see lying there passed out on the lawn next door to the house party. Kristin's presence usually attracted positive attention. She was captivating, but lying on the ground like that, all eyes were on her for a different reason. Here was this girl. She was happy. She was always smiling, fairly reserved though. Just seeing her so helpless was sad. And the pair helped Kristin to her feet, and they started guiding her on the short walk back to her dorm. As they set off, another student saw them and also assisted. His name was Paul Flores. He was a 19-year-old acquaintance of Kristin's, and he's like, you know what? I know where her dorm is. I can help you out, and I can take Kristin home the rest of the way, because his dorm was close by. One by one, the other students parted ways, leaving Paul with Kristin. The problem was, she was never seen again after that walk. Kristin never made it back to her room in Cal Poly's red brick residence halls in Mustang Circle, and by the next morning, she had truly vanished. When Kristin failed to return home or contact anyone all weekend long, of course, everyone was concerned. Her roommates, her friends, they realized something was wrong, and by that Monday, which was Memorial Day, they started pressuring authorities to take action. However, the initial response by campus police was dangerously slow. The Cal Poly University police did not immediately treat Kristin's absence as an emergency at all. Officers just assumed she may have gone away on an impromptu trip since it was a holiday weekend. Okay, I guess that would be safe to assume, but wouldn't she have taken her ID and her wallet, things that she actually left behind? And her roommate saw it sitting in her dorm room and thought, something's not right. However, the campus police waited nearly a week before formally reporting her as a missing person. Her parents didn't even know she was gone. She wasn't back home, and she and her family were actually fairly new to California and the United States. They were originally from Germany and had only been living in California since Kristin was in high school. It was her very first year away at college. The delay in reporting her missing meant that critical clues were entirely lost. In fact, it took 5 days for proper investigation to even launch after Kristin disappeared. And by the time San Luis Obispo County sheriffs got the detectives involved, Kristin's trail had gone completely cold. Why hadn't she made it back inside her room? No one knew. And everyone on campus was shocked. Friends were trying to help put together a timeline, and the 3 students that helped her after she'd been on that lawn were interviewed. Since Paul was the very last person after Tim and Cheryl saw Kristin, he was under immense scrutiny. But some thought he wasn't under enough scrutiny. And that's because it took 10 days after Kristin went missing for them to search his dorm room. Major fail on the investigators' part. But to be fair, Kristin's wasn't searched either. Not that that's any better. Any evidence that might have been in those rooms was likely cleaned up, or it could be contaminated. Waiting so long to secure the scenes hindered this investigation. Family, friends, community members, they were outraged. Many believed that these early missteps destroyed any chances of finding Kristin or proving what happened to her. In the months and then the years that followed, significant blame was directed at the campus police and university officials for failing to promptly get help from the outside authorities and find Kristin. Now, this criticism eventually prompted the community to pursue changes in a major way. The way that campus police coordinate with local law enforcement when these kind of crimes occur or if a student goes missing. They wanted lawmakers to pass the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act, making it the law that campus police have to do more because they were made aware of Kristin not coming home and they delayed reporting it to the police. Even without a crime scene, investigators quickly zeroed in on Paul Flores. He was the last person with Kristin. He became their prime suspect. When Paul was first interviewed by campus police, they saw fresh injuries on him. He had a black eye and he had scratches on his knees. Paul said he got the black eye playing basketball with his friends over the weekend. But when detectives checked with those friends, the story could not be confirmed. They said Paul had not been injured in any game. So when confronted, Paul admitted the basketball story wasn't exactly true. But it was one of those things he said where, you don't want to be suspect of anything guilty. So you just give them an explanation because he said he couldn't actually recall how he got the wounds. But they thought he was lying. Detectives thought that Paul, knowing that Kristin was in a vulnerable position, had taken this opportunity to violate her back in his dorm, and then something violent happened. They just couldn't prove it. As the search for Kristin ramped up, officers deployed specially trained cadaver dogs around this campus. And what was eerie is that multiple dogs independently alerted strongly to Paul's dorm room. When they were brought into the Cal Poly dorms, every cadaver dog headed straight to Paul's mattress inside his room, indicating the scent of human decomposition had been there. Now, in case you don't realize this, and I had to check because I was like, wow, I know they didn't check for 10 days, so clearly there could have been decomp fluids and things like that, but decomposition starts happening right after someone dies. That process starts occurring, so even within an hour, 2 hours, you're going to have some type of reactions in the body that these dogs can smell. And this was a disturbing sign to the police that Kristin's dead body had been in Paul's room, at least at some point. However, without physical remains or a confession, this case remained merely circumstantial. And over the next few months, of course, Paul lawyered up and became uncooperative. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and when called before a grand jury that same year, he refused to answer any more questions about Kristin's disappearance. So with Paul staying silent and no body or DNA or any kind of evidence available, authorities could not arrest him. And I know how frustrating that could be, but also due process, right? Because you really do have to have evidence and probable cause to detain someone and charge them with a crime. And they had still not found Kristin dead or alive. Her parents, Stan and Denise, were devastated. Of course they were. They wanted answers. They trusted that their daughter was going to be safe at college. Kristin's disappearance didn't just affect her family and her friends. It shook the whole community. Cal Poly had never experienced a case like this before, and for months and then years, students lived in fear. They took cautionary measures. They did things they never had to think twice about before. Knowing that a fellow student had vanished after a campus party, everyone was on edge. The case unfortunately became a cautionary tale. Don't go drinking and walk home alone. Yikes. I mean, it is good advice. Kristin is a person, though. She's not just a headline that turns into some kind of warning, but those warnings were warranted. There could be a killer out there. In response, Cal Poly ramped up their safety programs, and all the female students were urged to travel in groups and remain vigilant. Local businesses kept Kristin's missing persons flyers in their windows long after 1996. Sales of pepper spray, extra door locks, and self-defense classes all spiked as women were taking precautions so that, sadly, they wouldn't end up going missing or worse. These students just wanted to get an education, to graduate without the fear that they were going to leave home and never come back for tragic reasons. One student made a comment that it was true by national standards that this was a safe community, but that doesn't help when you're the family of a missing person or a victim. And this really showed the community's sense of security had been shaken. And as time passed, the lack of answers weighed heavily. The unsolved mystery also became a source of local lore. So many people had stories about what they thought happened to Kristin. Some floated a theory that Kristin had never left campus at all, that her body was actually buried under the big cement P that was up on the hillside. And this story seemed plausible since it overlooked at least the last route that she had been seen that night, and cadaver dogs had alerted near that hillside. This story swirled around campus, and there was a billboard with Kristin's photo and a tip line number that stood alongside US Highway 101 for years. And that was a constant reminder that her case remained open. It was still open when Rachel Newhouse's roommates called San Obispo police on Friday the 13th that November, 2 years later. When word got out that another student was missing, this community was instantly on edge again. Kristin's case was still on students' minds. Now, their fears deepened. Had Kristin's killer been waiting all of this time for another female to let her guard down. And now he's struck again. I think you can understand why local police took Rachel's disappearance seriously from the beginning. They already had a blemish on their record. But it's not just because of Kristin's unsolved case, no. Something more recent happened. Something was called in. Just that early Friday the 13th morning, before Rachel's roommates were even awake to realize she hadn't come home, several calls were made to 911 from pedestrians who had used that same Jennifer Street bridge that morning. They were calling to report a large pool of blood on the overpass. Now, they assumed it came from a dead animal that had scampered off or been eaten by prey. Police considered it a biohazard, so they sent out the fire department and they went out there and hosed it down. But now that Rachel is missing and her roommates said that that was a regular route she took, they wondered if this was a lead. The police did not want there to be mass hysteria, although I think it was a little late because students were already having deja vu. The circumstances were so similar to what happened to Kristin, just a walk home alone after having some drinks. Oh, but I have failed to mention that there was some victim blaming happening here. Whispers about underage drinking being an issue. Both Kristin Smart, 19, and Rachel Newhouse, only 20, were both under the legal drinking age, and both had been seen consuming alcohol on the nights they vanished. It was as though it was being chalked up to don't drink and make bad decisions, but many students didn't see that as fair. It could have been any of them. Blaming them for going missing seemed really callous. Drinking wasn't the problem. A serial predator seemed to be. Rachel's parents, Phil and Montel Newhouse, were notified, and it wasn't the call they would have ever expected to get. But I haven't told you much about Rachel, so let me give you all the details about this beautiful, intelligent, and now missing young woman. Rachel Lindsay Newhouse was born on June 16th of 1978 in Irvine, California, to her mother Montel and her father Phil Newhouse. Rachel was the middle child. She had an older brother, Travis, 2 years older than her, and a sister, Ashley, 2 years younger than she was. They were all very close, but especially the girls. Growing up with a built-in best friend means there's always someone there to play with, to look up to, and to relate to. And little Ashley adored her older sister. She was her role model, and she wanted to be just like Rachel. Their mother even dressed them alike, matching pigtails with ribbons. Rachel's were yellow, Ashley's were pink. Their shirts matched too, with little Cabbage Patch dolls on them, and even the Cabbage Patch Kids looked like twins. They had matching pigtails as well, and it was the 80s, so I recognized that style right away. Rachel and Ashley were inseparable. The same clothes and backpacks for the first day of school, and they had each other for every milestone. You can tell they loved each other so much and had such an unbreakable bond. They were true California girls, enjoying the beach, the sun, and everything the West Coast had to offer growing up. Rachel was very popular. She was naturally outgoing, happy, and active. She loved the outdoors, did well in school, and played many sports, including soccer, cross country, and track while attending Irvine High School. Rachel was called a perfectionist by her sister, and sometimes it would come to bite her in the butt. It could be a strength, but it could also be a weakness. She said that Rachel was someone who played it safe. She was a good friend. She was very caring, funny, generous, and someone who would be there when you needed her. She also loved frogs, stuffed frogs. She collected them, and it reminded me of another case we did, Yoshan Marie Ashbrook. She too collected all kinds of frog memorabilia, so that stuck out to me. Rachel would keep anything that had a frog on it. She was a student body officer and a member of the California Scholarship Foundation. She was also a straight-A student and still found the time to make lasting friendships. One of Rachel's best friends since freshman year in high school were Katie McNutt and Andrea West. They knew she was a very dedicated student who knew exactly what she wanted to do in the future. Rachel was passionate about fitness and nutrition and wanted to become a nutritionist so she could help others stay healthy and live longer. Rachel herself spent a lot of time working out at the gym. She also loved children, and she would babysit for local kids for extra spending money. None of the things Rachel loved to do stopped when she decided to move out to San Luis Obispo for college. She graduated high school in 1996, and by the fall, she was attending California Polytechnic University. Rachel went off to college with her two best friends, Kathy and Andrea. They were both studying childhood development, but they talked every single day, at least once. It was nice going to a new place and already knowing someone. They were each other's support system. They were very close and hung out all the time. Andrea called Rachel the perfect friend, always there when you needed her, a happy, cheery person that cared, and Rachel didn't stop babysitting either. She found a local family in SLO, St. Louis Obispo, to help out whenever she wasn't working. Now, she worked part-time as a hostess at SLO Brewing Company. At Cal Poly, Rachel was just as popular as she was in high school, even though she was a much smaller fish in a bigger pond. Rachel's family was also very proud of her. She had grown into a wonderful young woman. They were excited to see what she would become in the future. But the last thing on their list was missing. Rachel had been at Cal Poly for 2.5 years. She was currently in the tail end of her junior year, and that October of 1998, her grandmother, Patricia Newhouse, came to campus for a visit, and she was so impressed with her granddaughter's work ethic. She was well-rounded, conscientious, and working hard. Patricia said she was all about taking care of business and getting stuff done, so it was a shock when just weeks later, Rachel was gone. Her parents, getting that call was unexpected to say the least. The police and her family did what is also expected when someone isn't in touch and no one has heard from them. They call around to friends and other family members, but no one had any information about Rachel. Everyone she normally kept in touch with hadn't seen or heard from her since Thursday night. Rachel's younger sister, Ashley, remembers getting a call from their mother. All she said was, "Rachel's missing. You have to come home now." It was her mother's tone that made her realize right away that this was serious. Both Ashley and Travis, Rachel's older brother, were attending college in San Diego, and they met up with their parents in Irvine before making their way to Cal Poly to search for Rachel. Everything was happening so fast, and Ashley literally said it was so unbelievable to their family. They were like, "No, this doesn't happen to families like ours." I hear that so many times, and it kind of freaks me out, but we're all capable of having something like this happen. But it made Ashley remember something from the night before. She had this really weird, excruciating stomach ache, not like a normal stomach pain. It was different. She called it the most severe stomach ache she ever had in her life. I thought maybe it was more of a gut feeling, like something wasn't right, because now she's thinking that she could be so connected with her sister that her body knew that Rachel was in trouble. And I believe it. You can call me crazy, but I've experienced gut feelings and intuition that were totally spot on. Ashley and her family were scared. They were really hoping that it would just be a misunderstanding. But they just knew that Rachel would never leave without letting somebody know. And by the time the family drove the 5 hours to get to campus, Rachel's friends, with the help of local police, had already created a handwritten missing person sign with Rachel's photo on them, and they were in black and white, but they had all of her information, that she was 20 years old, 5'6", 120 pounds, light brown hair, brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a black pair of leggings, a blue button-up blouse, and black platform shoes when she disappeared. They put these flyers up everywhere, and investigators started interviewing everyone who had been with Rachel the night before. What they gathered is that she had been to a number of parties that night and eventually made her way with a group of her friends and her roommates to a restaurant called Tortilla Flats. There was a fraternity and sorority fundraiser happening there that night, and everyone remembers seeing Rachel getting ready to leave by herself. Now, of course, they're going to ask you if anything unusual happened while you were there, and something stood out. Rachel and another girl who was in their group got into an argument. Both of them had been drinking. Things got heated. But her roommates insisted that was not the reason that Rachel decided to leave. But then again, I don't think anyone wanted to feel responsible for her going off by herself. However, the investigators pulled up the original 911 call from one of her roommates, and in that call, she specifically said that Rachel was drinking because she was upset after arguing with a friend. Now, nobody provided any context or the friend's name, but Rachel was seen leaving on foot at 11:30 p.m. Owners of the restaurant explained that anyone that provided a license, a driver's license showing that they were over 21, were given a wristband to buy drinks. If they were underage, they could go upstairs to the dance floor and just hang out. But we all know there are ways to get drinks without having a valid ID. There's fake ones, your friends can buy you drinks, or you could literally use a friend's ID if you look even a little bit alike. CCTV videos were pulled from nearby businesses along the street that Rachel might have taken to go back home, but nothing significant materialized. Now I mapped it, and it showed me 3 different routes that you could take, and all of them were 47 minutes, even if she did take the so-called shortcut over Jennifer Street Bridge. But that did look like an easier route from downtown. Authorities would not confirm which way Rachel went because they weren't even sure she got further than the street where the restaurant was located until they connected that large pool of blood on the bridge to possibly not being from an animal. The next day, on Saturday, the 14th of November, crews went out there to try to see if they could swab any of the remnants, but it had all been washed away by the fire department. That was hopeless. However, as they were making their way back down the stairs, they noticed another area that looked like it had a blood stain on it. It was on one of the stairs. They figured it may have been connected, so they swabbed that smaller stain. It still looked fresh, by the way. And then they did a preliminary test that can determine whether or not it's human blood. They'd know by Monday. So now it was a waiting game. But the investigation hadn't stopped. They had rescue crews, tracking dogs, helicopters out there looking for any sign of Rachel. There were police right outside of Tortilla Flats interviewing people that were walking down the street, just in case they could have seen or heard anything. They also went down every possible route that I showed you on Google Maps, and probably other ones that I don't even know about, and just different streets, looking for any of Rachel's belongings or clues that could lead them in the right direction. Of course, I don't even have to tell you this because I'm sure you can guess, the media was on the story right away, which actually is not a bad thing. Getting the word out is so important because it means you're spreading the story wider, but it also means that the fear is spreading as well. And it seemed like the captain of the police department, Bart Topham, was trying to ease people's fears. He told reporters that people who are reported missing sometimes go off either by themselves or just to be with friends. It echoed kind of the victim blaming concerns that I told you about that came after the underage drinking. Reporters were running with that part of the story as well, asking other students what they thought about both Kristin and now Rachel vanishing after getting drunk. A 20-year-old student, Malia McKay, said that Rachel's case made her remember Kristin's case and how foul play was suspected, but then no one was arrested, and Kristin was never found dead or alive. It really scared her. But then she said the effect kind of wore off. When something like this happens again, though, it's ridiculous, her words. She said many students are now afraid to walk alone to their cars at night, and many of her friends had started to get pepper spray. They were no longer allowing each other to walk by themselves, and instead they were arranging to be picked up from late classes, and they made sure that anyone that needed a ride got one. Malia also mentioned that her friends depend on one another to look out for each other, and now they have an even larger sense of responsibility when they go out partying and drinking. But she made it clear that even though it seems like Rachel may have been drunk when she left the restaurant on Thursday night, she's not responsible for her own disappearance, no matter how much she had to drink. And you can give me your thoughts on that. Another student that was interviewed by the local Tribune, 18-year-old freshman Amity Armstrong, agreed with that statement. She said students like Rachel should be safe wherever and however they choose to drink. Other Cal Poly students mentioned how the campus really needed stronger police presence and way better lighting at night. One person said they work on campus really late, and when they come home at 2 a.m., they feel like they're in a complete ghost town. So you know what they had to do? Bring an X-Acto knife with them while they're walking home. Others mentioned that right after Kristin went missing, there was a service that used to provide someone walking with you or going to different buildings or your car late at night between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. But all of a sudden, that service stopped. It was like when the fear subsided, things kind of went back to normal. What was interesting is that on the same page in the newspaper where all the students were being interviewed about their thoughts regarding Rachel's disappearance, there was another write-up. It was entitled, Cal Poly Survey Linked Alcohol and Violence. That survey was done just a month prior in October. 843 students were questioned about whether they experienced threats of physical violence, actual physical violence, theft involving force, or the threat of force, including forced intercourse or unwanted touching. And they were asking whether this was something they experienced around campus. The survey found, according to this article, that 80% of students had reported they were victims of unwanted sexual intercourse and had consumed alcohol or other substances. And then the vice president of student affairs, Juan Gonzalez, even commented, saying there's just a higher likelihood of being involved in an issue of violence when alcohol is involved. However, he did stress that the two students that disappeared after drinking should not be held responsible for their fates, saying no one should be a victim of violence just because they've been out partying. The article talked about services on campus that can help with responsible drinking so that there are not serious impacts on students' academic life, their social life, or their safety, which I think is good. But also ironic to me that this article was right next to the one about Rachel's disappearance. But to be fair, I think most of us know the reality is we're more vulnerable after consuming alcohol. It's science. Our inhibitions go down, even soon after you start drinking. Many people can feel the effects after just one drink. I'm guilty. As a person's blood alcohol content rises, you get that feeling of reduced inhibitions, and it becomes more noticeable. You're in the euphoria stage. That's the first stage of intoxication. And with just 2 beers, you can fall into the next stage where you feel even more relaxed, and you could even lose coordination. I think most of this is well known, but I think it's important to reiterate sometimes because we forget that we could let our guard down very easily, maybe even being more inclined to go home with someone or ask them for a ride when we would usually say no. And I think it's harder to tell that someone has weird vibes or something's off if you have consumed alcohol because your perception is skewed. And that was one of the theories, that Rachel got into someone's car, that she didn't even walk home. But soon, they were leaning more towards the likelihood that she did take Jennifer Street Bridge. And that's because by Monday, it had been confirmed that blood they found was not from an animal. It was human. I put this video of the blood that had already been washed off the pavement into my editing software, and I traced the outline, then colored it red, just so you can get an idea of what it might have looked like before it was hosed down. Now investigators had crime scene analysts back at the bridge, and they were combing every inch of it. They also reached out to Rachel's parents, and they requested their DNA. This is when things got really serious, because they were using it to see if it was a match for Rachel on the bridge. Of course, they were already in a state of shock, but this just added another layer. Now it seemed like there was no hope that Rachel was going to be found alive. Not when they're thinking she's bleeding up on that bridge. At this point, Rachel's uncle, who happened to be a criminal defense attorney out in Riverside, California, became the family's spokesperson. He told the media that Rachel was not a distant family member. He knew her since the day she was born, and the case had now moved from a missing persons case to a criminal investigation. And at the same time, Rachel's grandma was speaking out. Remember that she had just visited Rachel a few weeks before she went missing? Well, she wanted the public to know her granddaughter wasn't some kind of party person, as she put it. The public, of course, wanted to know why this was now a criminal investigation. News stations were capturing footage of crime scene personnel actually removing parts of the Jennifer Street Bridge, parts of the railing, and they were bagging them to bring them back to the crime lab. Now, that seemed like a pretty big deal. They had also closed down the entire bridge, and it had crime scene tape all around it. However, at the same time, the captain of the police department was downplaying the blood that had already been found there. He was quoted saying, "There's no direct link, nor are we claiming a link. We're just doing everything to cover our bases." He also refused to provide any more information about the seizure of those handrails, saying that it would jeopardize their investigation. Fair enough, but I'll let you know that behind the yellow tape and high up on that footpath, investigators had determined someone, a human, not an animal, had stood there long enough or laid there long enough in one spot to create that large pool. I'm going to show it to you again. And looking down to where that other stain had been on the stairs, they started to realize it was a trail of blood, that it had dripped and smeared from the pool above down the stairs, and then there were smears on the handrails on ground level, and more blood on the pavement closer to the parking lot that's attached to the Oso's roadside. The blood just stopped at the parking lot area, which to investigators meant that a bleeding human being went into a vehicle, since the trail just ended. Now it looked like a struggle. The way those rails were smeared, it was like the victim was grabbing and holding on for their life as the attacker tried to pull them away. It also made sense if there was a predator waiting for a woman to walk across that bridge alone, they would park on the Oso side, because on the other side was a residential area. And if a car was parked there for too long, somebody might notice. If a car was parked in the parking lot, though, that would be completely normal. It was terrifying to think someone could have been on that bridge or had followed Rachel up that bridge, probably came up behind her, injured her enough to be able to grab her and force her off that bridge into their car. The police were asking the public to come forward with any tips if they had seen anything unusual on that bridge after midnight on Friday the 13th of November. As days and days went by, students, particularly female students, were starting to seek out help from the local women's center where they could buy things like pepper spray or self-defense items. And I do highly recommend that you buy these kind of things for yourself. I have a friend who I met at CrimeCon who sells items like this. And if you bought something a long time ago, I highly recommend you look into a new version because they have special details on them now where your attacker cannot use your weapon against you. Let's say it's a taser or it's pepper spray. There is now a strap you put over your wrist, and if they try to grab it, it disengages the item so they can't spray it on you or tase you with it, which I think is brilliant. I will link some below just in case. I did get one for my teenage daughter recently, and that's highly recommended. More women on campus were so fearful at this time, especially people like Samina Khan. She was Rachel's lab partner. Now, I've never been in a situation where you look over and there's an empty spot that was always filled with your friend or another classmate and they're just gone. Samira had said that she always thought about arming herself, but after this happened, she made the decision to go out and buy items. Parents were now calling the school. They were wanting to know what in the world is going on. You have another missing woman, another missing student, and of course, all kinds of rumors were swirling about this case. There was one parent who did talk to reporters and said they almost wouldn't allow their daughter back after what happened to Kristin. And now they're even more concerned. Not too long after this, the FBI was called in to assist with this investigation. And by November 20th, a new task force was set up to locate Rachel. Her family put up a $10,000 reward for any information that would lead to her whereabouts. And still, the captain would not explain why this was a criminal investigation. He said police have not developed a direct nexus between the blood found on Jennifer Street Bridge and the missing student. And they still needed to wait to confirm whether that blood was Rachel's at all. Now, over a week had passed. Her parents had left. They had gone back home to Irvine. They made a statement through Rachel's uncle that they were very grateful for all that the police department was doing to help find their daughter. And also how gracious residents had been. They offered them room and board and food and everything. They were beyond thankful for all of that. But there wasn't much they could do. And that must be so frustrating to know that it's in everybody else's hands. It's in investigators' hands, and they're doing everything they can. And it seemed like they were. Investigators began an extensive search at Cold Canyon Landfill. They requested all waste material from a specific time frame when trash pickups would have been conducted after Friday the 13th. That would have been terrible news for Rachel's family. At that point, they're checking dump sites. That meant that authorities no longer thought that their daughter was alive. And I hate to keep reiterating this, but I was reading newspaper clippings, and each one echoed the same thing about Captain Bart Topham. He still maintained there was no evidence of foul play, and he refused to answer when asked if they had any suspects that they were looking into. They were still waiting DNA results from the bridge. The captain said that decision to search the landfill was not a result of specific leads or information that was developed during this investigation. He just said that early on, it was determined that landfill should be searched as a precautionary measure. And I'm only assuming here, but maybe they searched it in Kristin's case. And they figured, why not do it now, just in case an item of clothing or worse, Rachel's body was found. And they probably just wanted to get a head start on it because they delayed so much when Kristin disappeared. And you might be thinking this. People started asking it. Are these cases connected? Well, the captain was reluctant to compare them. And he might be getting on your nerves because I know he kept getting on mine while I was researching. But maybe he was just trying to keep things under wraps since it was an ongoing investigation. But I think there was a lot of covering their own butts so that they did not feel what happened in Kristin's case would happen again. But the chief of police, Jim Gardner, told the press that everyone wanted answers and they were all scared. At this point, investigator Larry Hobson from the DA's office joins the task force. Now, he had different thoughts right away. He believed the blood was so large that it had to be foul play. So in that case, he thought, young woman, late at night, I'm going to put together a list of registered sex offenders in this area and go door to door. And that's what he did. He asked them, where were you between Thursday night and Friday morning? And one by one, they would get eliminated or looked into further, but there was still no leads. And finally, it was December. The holiday season was just around the corner, and Cal Poly students were getting ready to go home for the holidays. But sadly, Rachel would not be coming home. This would be the first time that the Newhouse family would experience Christmas without her. Ashley said it was impossible to celebrate and be happy when your sister's missing. She felt helpless. She wanted so badly to be able to help her sister, to get to her, because she knew something bad happened, and she just wanted to find her. She tried to describe this weird panic she felt inside that was forming and getting stronger in her. And it's probably impossible to describe that. For me, it's when I've lost somebody that I love, and you know there's nothing you can do, but you just feel this misalignment inside of you, and you can't put it together and make it make sense. It's like kind of hurrying up only to sit around because there's nothing you can do. Everyone was feeling this way in their own ways. Detective Hobson said it was grueling. He did 12-hour shifts, and every single day he went in the office knowing that he would have to follow up on every single lead again, and they had already gone nowhere. But at the same time, he knew he had to, because if just one of them was missed, it could be the one that solves this case and brings Rachel home. By now, the reward had gone to $60,000 because Anaheim Angels center field baseball player Jim Edmonds offered $50,000 for information leading to Rachel's return. And around the same time, radio stations and media outlets were apparently putting out false information, and they needed to correct that later because they kept saying that a body had been found. And this inundated the police station. They had calls up to 30 times a day just asking, is the dead body Rachel's? People were calling and wanting information or even just to report that a body had been found. This really upset the captain. So much so, he had to make a statement. And he said, the rumors are unproductive. And if people really want to help law enforcement and the family, then stop gossiping. It's being blown way out of proportion. He went on to say that there was nothing significant to report, and they're still waiting on that DNA analysis. But I'm going to cut to the chase. Because December 19th, just days before Christmas, that report came back. And you could have guessed it. But that blood on the railing, the blood on the stairs, and the upper portion of that bridge, that was Rachel Newhouse's blood. I looked on Google Maps as much as I could to try to figure out exactly where she was attacked. And what I could tell from not only where I saw the blood spot and was able to line that up with the bridge, but also where investigators were taking swabs, they were taking them from the Oso side. And the reason I say that is because that side near the parking lot has almost a salmon-colored ground, whereas the other side doesn't have that. So it seems like she was walking from the bar area, as we know, up the bridge. She was almost about to cross, and that's when she was attacked according to where the blood spot was. And then she was dragged back down, put into a car, and someone took off. It's terrifying. And I'm not trying to be unnecessarily rude or critical of this police department, but the only thing I could think of was, duh. He kept saying, we don't think there's a connection. There's no connection. We have to wait. And I was thinking, this happened in the same time frame that this girl went missing. What do you mean? There was so much blood. I mean, my brain would have automatically been like, she was abducted, she was attacked, she was probably hurt fatally, and it was just frustrating to me. And months went by with no answers. But then, another 20-year-old college student went missing. Concern began to grow on March 11th when Gail Crawford couldn't get a hold of her daughter, Andrea. It was not like her not to answer her mother's calls. They were best friends. They spoke every day, multiple times a day, and they lived about 2 hours away, so they were always talking. Andrea was a college student that was taking classes towards her interior design degree at Cuesta Junior College, and she had plans to transfer to Cal Poly. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment off Branch Street in San Luis Obispo for the last 2 months. Actually, Andrea's house was only 8 minutes away from Rachel's house and only 4 minutes away from Jennifer Street Bridge. It was just on the other side of the railroad tracks from where Rachel lived. And I thought that had to be some kind of connection. Gail had actually started paging her daughter on Tuesday, March 9th, and hadn't got an answer. The last time she heard from Andrea, she needed to go out to buy some school supplies. So she expected to hear back from her about how that went because she shared everything with her. Wednesday went by, Andrea never called back. And then Gail paged her over and over again, and she usually would call back at least within 30 minutes or so. Back then, if you remember this, if you lived during that time, you would put in a code. And in Gail's case, she would page her with 411 when she just wanted her daughter to call back and talk about something. 411 is code for information. But over time, that night, Gail started punching in the code for 911. And that was to alert Andrea she needed to call her back immediately. Like it was an emergency. She needed to talk to her. Gail waited all Thursday to hear back from her daughter, but she didn't. At this point, she began calling nonstop. She couldn't take it anymore. So by 1 a.m., she called the San Luis Obispo Police Department and asked them, please go over to my daughter's house and knock on the door and tell me if she's there. They send an officer over. He knocks on the door. There is no answer. He leaves a note that told Andrea to please call her mother when she gets back. Gail was still so worried. I would be, but she finally made it to sleep that night, only to be jolted awake at 5 a.m. She said that she sat straight up in bed. There was just this overwhelming feeling of dread that came over her, and she said something is wrong. She was in a panic. She called the police again, telling them, please go over there, knock the doors down if you have to. I have to know where my daughter is. Cops get the keys from the landlord. They enter Andrea's apartment, and she's not inside. Now, this was very strange to her mother since her car was there. They began looking around and noticed what appeared to be bloodstains on a rug in the entryway. Furniture was pushed out of place. Andrea's pager and her eyeglasses were still inside. Gail rushed to get there as fast as she could. Now, this wasn't a significant amount of blood that they found, but the fact that there was blood there at all was concerning. They kept searching. Her front door had been locked, but they came up with a theory when they got into the bathroom. They saw dirt inside Andrea's bathtub. It appeared to be footprints from boots or sneakers, and right above the shower was a very small sliding window. So they thought, could someone had crawled in through this window, attacked this young woman, took her out of her own front door? That's what they thought. And they believed that that meant she could still be alive. So they immediately had to start a large-scale search. They started in the neighborhood. They were going door to door, asking neighbors, did you see or hear anything? And they were spreading out into other neighboring communities all the way to downtown. Remember how I said the door was locked? Well, they wonder how, because you need a key to physically lock her doors. When Gail gets there, she's searching around for Andrea's house keys. She knows they're usually on an 8-ball keychain. She carried it with her all the time, and it was missing. Even though her purse, her driver's license, they were all still there inside of her car, by the way, pillowcases were also missing from Andrea's bed. Her VCR, several videotapes, and some CDs were gone. It was such a mystery as to what happened here. But one thing stood out. Both Andrea Crawford and Rachel Newhouse were 5'6", 120 pounds, with light brown hair with blonde highlights. And actually, when their missing persons flyers were put up side by sides on poles and at different windows, they looked like the same person. They were both athletic, in great shape, both living in the same vicinity. Right away, Rachel's family thought their cases had to be connected. But wouldn't you know it, guess who didn't think so? Captain Bart Topham. He was quoted saying, there is no indication, no evidence that this disappearance is linked. It didn't matter what he said because everyone thought it was. And students were even more terrified than ever. Let me tell you more about Andrea Lynn Crawford. First of all, you can tell her name's Andrea instead of Andrea because her mother chose to spell her name in a way that made that very clear. Aundria. And she was born in Franklin County, Washington on July 10th of 1978 to her father James and her mother Gail. Her father was an electrician, and her mother worked at Sears department stores. When she was just a baby, Gail and her left for Fresno because the relationship with her father unfortunately didn't work out with her mother. But Andrea was spoiled by her loving grandparents and aunt and uncle on her mother's side, always giving her all the love and attention that she could ever need. And eventually she formed a very strong bond with her mom as she grew up. She actually dropped her father's last name and took her mother's maiden name, Crawford. From a very young age, Andrea was very active. She loved ballet and worked really hard at it, eventually making it into the Central California Ballet Company. She performed for over 9 years. Her real passion, though, was horses. That's how she got the family nickname Ballerina Tomboy, because she split her time between pirouettes and shoving horse poo. Yes, it's true. She was dedicated. She loved her horse. She loved horse barrel races and dreamed of one day living on a ranch with a bunch of horses of her own. She loved animals. When she was little, she used to get mad at her grandfather for crushing snails. I mean, I would too. I had snails as pets. Maybe I'm weird, but I love all kinds of creatures, and so did she. She was also a huge fan of monster trucks, and she absolutely loved country music. Eventually at Bullard High School, she started to struggle though. She couldn't get through her schoolwork, and she had the ambition, but sometimes it just doesn't translate to the classroom. She actually did not graduate with her class, but she pushed through and completed a home study program called Restart, knowing what she wanted to do, and that is go to Cal Poly University. Even though she had to start out at a 2-year junior college, she dreamed of owning her very own design company one day. She started her first 2 semesters at Fresno Community College close to home and had just recently transferred to Cuesta College, which was affiliated with Cal Poly, and they would assist you in transferring there. When she was first enrolled, she decided to rent a bedroom and a house, and she was working as a cashier for an automotive company. Her coworker said she worked there for about 5 months before she moved to her new apartment. But she was one of the brightest lights in the store, someone who always had a smile on her face and went out of her way to make new employees feel comfortable. That's what they said. She had just moved to San Luis Obispo less than a year before this and had recently moved into a duplex that she was living in. She had only been there since January of 1999, so only 2 months. She loved being close to friends, work, and school, so that's why she moved. She had recently started working as a receptionist for James Waldsmith, who was a veterinarian in the area. She deeply cared about her cats, and recently she had to pay over $800 for a treatment. She was trying to get rid of an infection that one of her cats was suffering with. Andrea had always been generous, loving, and helpful. Part of that may have come from her belief system. Her uncle said she was a Christian who wore a promise ring that was given to her by him and his wife as a symbol of chastity before marriage, which is something she believed in. She treated people the way that she would expect to be treated, even when she started her first semester at Cuesta College. She was new there, and she saw a student on crutches trying to carry their books. Andrea helped that student, even after so many other students walked right by her, rushing to get to their own classes. And Andrea was late to her class, but she stopped to help this person that she didn't even know, because that's the type of person that she was. She and her best friend, Stephanie Nikolopoulos, had mapped out an entire tour of art museums that they planned to visit that summer. And Andrea was loyal, strong-willed, and competitive, according to Stephanie. She also said she had a really unique laugh and a wild side. For example, Andrea didn't just like to drive her Mustang, she liked to race her Mustang. And she would take on the challenge of racing other drivers. Do I think it's safe? Probably not the safest thing to do, but she often won those races. And Stephanie said she was always up for a good time, down to do anything, and she had that little wild side, except she was still cautious and responsible. And quite a girly girl, despite her kind of competitive nature, according to Stephanie. Apparently, her entire room was pink. I mean, pink is a nice color. I know guys who like pink and wear pink, but I get it. For somebody that was called Ballerina Tomboy by their family, I guess she lived up to that even as an adult. But now, Andrea is nowhere to be found. Just like Rachel and Kristin, she's gone. Her house is now a crime scene. The yellow crime scene tape is draped all around outside. There are crime scene investigators. There are missing persons task force members scouring every inch of this duplex. Her mother was absolutely distraught, constantly in tears, even getting in her own car with her mother looking everywhere, down every street, even in wooded areas. in the alleyways and places that were probably too dangerous to venture, but they didn't care. They needed to find Andrea. The police bring in a criminal profilist, and in no uncertain terms, they were like, listen, you better find this person who's taken these girls. They're so bold that they're going into a woman's house through a really small window like that, taking her from her own residence, because that was the theory, right? And what's sad is that Gail knew that her daughter was cautious. She locked the doors. She wasn't someone that would carelessly not look around at her surroundings. But here's the thing. Her cat Riley had just had surgery. Remember I told you $800. And she was leaving that cat inside that bathroom so it didn't get hurt itself, and it could heal. Because she had another cat, Roscoe, and she didn't want Riley to be bothered. So what she did was she opened up that window just a little bit, just to let in some fresh air, and to think that some predator, some monster used that opportunity to get inside this woman's house. It's horrifying. That meant he had to have been watching her or knew that that window was open. Well, of course, the first person they want to talk to is Andrea's most current ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old Joshua Bean. He had dated her for 18 months before they recently called it quits. He was also a student at Cuesta College, but he had an alibi for that night. The night that they believed that Andrea was taken, because that was hard to nail down as well. There were varying reports of when neighbors and friends last heard from Andrea or saw her. For example, one of her friends said they were on the phone with her until 2:30 in the morning on Thursday. Her neighbor in the next unit that was attached to hers was on a trip to Europe, so they couldn't ask them if Andrea had been home or not after that. One difference in all of this was that Andrea did not go out to bars and clubs. She didn't drink, so that aspect of the last two cases did not apply here. But she did like to stay out late at friends' houses, and she loved throwing parties. Her friends actually admitted they loved the fact that she was an awesome host, but didn't actually drink. But she hadn't been throwing a party that week. They brought in bloodhounds. They traced her scent, and it ended at the curb. Kind of like in Rachel's case. So this wasn't the scenario where she was out drinking like the two other girls. She was taken from her own home. And if students had been scared when Rachel went missing, they were terrified that a third student in their area was gone like this. And foul play was suspected right away. So many students, over 100, were seeking counseling. Even parents of students were seeking counseling from the school, and a lot were speaking out. There were over 200 people that attended a forum presented by Cal Poly's Health and Psych Services, and even cops were there. And they were giving some advice. Don't leave work or school alone. Travel with someone. Don't go jogging. Don't walk alone at night, and report any suspicious behavior to the authorities. I guess that's good advice, right? Be aware of your surroundings. Make sure you get home safe. And even the captain had something to say. He's like, this is my community. My kids were born and raised here. We're all concerned, and we're throwing in every resource and following every lead and processing evidence and chasing down anything that will help find these women. But the next thing that happened was pretty shocking. And people thought this was going to be a major break in the case. Andrea's ex-boyfriend, 21-year-old Joshua, he was arrested at the end of March, weeks after she went missing. Two women were on their way to the gym on campus, and they said that this man was acting strange. He was watching them from his pickup truck. And when the cops were called, they come out to campus. They find 230-round ammunition, magazines, a knife, and a .22 caliber rifle inside of Josh's truck. But after interviewing him, in depth, by the way, you're allowed to have guns. You're allowed to be a hunter. You're allowed to have registered guns, and you can safely contain them in your vehicle. I think perhaps, and I don't blame them, these women were on edge. They were suspicious of him. They knew he was Andrea's ex, and they got a weird vibe. And they did the right thing. They called police. Maybe he was checking them out. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable. I don't know. But they completely ruled him out as having anything to do with Andrea's disappearance. The case was on America's Most Wanted. It was on Good Morning America. It was getting national attention. And at this point is where the first real lead and huge crack in this case actually came. And I know you've been waiting for this. And sometimes you might be like on the edge of your seat saying, when is she going to tell us? It's all coming together. I promise. Someone was reading these articles about these women. Someone was watching the segments, and the wheels were starting to turn in their head. As they say, if you see something, say something. And this person watching and reading noticed something that he thought was more than a coincidence. It was a connection. And that person was David Zaragoza. He was a local resident and a parole officer. This is a man who comes in regular contact with some of the worst offenders in this city. He knows all their cases. He studies them. He understands their motives. He has to be face to face with gang members, violent offenders, serial predators, to name just a few types of monsters that are in his midst. When David was looking at an article in the newspaper in regard to Andrea's case, he began thinking about all the men he had as parolees, and there were a few that stood out, but one specifically, a very distinctive similarity in a case he committed earlier in Andrea's case, a small window. Remember I showed you that small sliding window in Andrea's bathroom? Well, one of David's parolees had also, in the past, managed to contort his body and slide through a very small window to violate a woman back in 1987. It was so similar. And he lived in this area, so David had to report his observations to police. He called, and he gave them this man's name. It was parolee 33-year-old Rex Allen Krebs. Now, he had only been out of prison for a year, but by all the reports from his parole officer, they were positive. It appeared like he had been reformed, that he was trying to be better and do better. And he served his time, 10 years of a 20-year sentence. And if you ask what it's for stalking a woman that had left a bar, forcing himself into her home through that window that I mentioned, and then forcing himself on that woman. He then broke into a second woman's home just a month later and tried to attempt the same thing. Like I said, served his time, right? And at this point, he has a long-term girlfriend. He's working a job for a lumber company, and he's about to be a dad. His girlfriend, Rosalind, was 5 months pregnant. So was he responsible for hurting these women? They called him a model parolee, someone who was employee of the month at his job, exemplary, a success story, rehabilitated. He was known as a hard worker. He listened to what his parole officer told him to do. So what officers decide to do is they go to his last known address and ask former and current neighbors what they knew about Rex. In his former neighborhood, through Megan's Law, his neighbors found out he was a violent offender and what he did to women, and they were not thrilled having him among them. So they started to get together and write letters and campaign for him to be evicted. One neighbor, Diane Morgan, started this entire movement, if you want to call it that. She thought this man was creepy. She had to live right next door to him. He was tattooed, he was really big, and he looked scary according to her, and he would stare her down. She was disgusted and afraid. So Diane started to write anonymous letters explaining who Rex was, and she left them in every single mailbox on their block. She even left a note for Rex himself. Part of it said, "We know who you are. We know what you did. The whole neighborhood is watching you." Then Diane kept calling the sheriff's department, asking almost every day, what can we do to get this monster out of our neighborhood? And she was told that even these type of offenders have rights. His landlord had done an entire background check on him, well, what they could gather. She didn't have the knowledge of his criminal record, but when she was informed of what kind of tenant was in her unit, she said, well, I found him to be a model renter. He always paid on time, he was clean, and he was always pleasant. However, she did reach out to his parole officer, and with everything that was happening in that neighborhood, his parole officer asked him to move, and he did. And these residents were so happy when Rex, the rapist, as they called him, left their neighborhood. They said they jumped up and down, they danced all night because they didn't have to share their community with a monster like that, even if he claimed to be a better person now. That was in September of 1998, just a month before Rachel disappeared. Right when Diane read about it in the newspaper, her and her friend looked at each other and they said, I wonder if it was Rex. He moved into a very secluded neighborhood after this on Davis Canyon Road near Avila Beach. And he'd been living there for the past 8 months or so. But the lumberyard that he was working at, called 84 Lumber, was at 236 Higuera Street, which happened to be only 5 minutes away from Tortilla Flats, where Rachel had been last seen. And Rex would go out drinking all the time with his work buddies right in that downtown area. Not only that, Andrea's house was only a 3-minute drive away from Rex's place of business. He would only have to take 2 turns to get onto her street. That alone seemed way too much of a coincidence, even though he did live kind of out of the way. When I say kind of out of the way, it's just a more rural area. It's a canyon, but it's only about 25 minutes away from the lumber company. So we're not talking that far, but much, much more secluded than you would be in San Luis Obispo. Now, Rex's buddies from his job were interviewed and they all liked him. His boss loved him. His boss was the one that gave him a second chance, even though he knew his past. And even customers were interviewed and they said that Rex was really nice. They talked about how he would mention how excited he was to become a dad and that he had a baby on the way. Everyone said when he was around his girlfriend, he was a totally different person than he was with his friends. When he was out, he would act all cocky and full of himself, but he was still nice, according to a patron that used to drink with him at Outlaw's Bar and Grill. They said he loved to dance, wear his cowboy boots, and he would put on rock and roll music in the jukebox. His favorite song was Metallica's Enter Sandman, and that's interesting. The lyrics to that song, if you know them, go something like this. Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight. Exit light, enter night. Take my hand off to Never Never Land. And I wondered, is that Never Seen Again land? But people said around Rosalind, he would pull out her chair, he would open doors. He was really sweet. And he wasn't really intimidating looking at all. He was only 5'6", 160 pounds. But that made me think, could he fit through a small window? What they decided to do to rule him out, because, there could be similarities in the way that an offender operates, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're guilty. So his parole officer, David, and Larry Hobson, the detective, decided to speak with Rex, informally, just at his job. And he was surprisingly cooperative. He answered all their questions. He wasn't nervous. He didn't even seem concerned. And of course, he wasn't involved in any of it, he said. But they did want to search his vehicle. And when they did, they uncovered a .22 caliber pellet gun. This is an air gun, a BB gun. And he explained, I only keep it on hand to shoot at the birds that get inside of our lumber area because they're really bothersome. That's it. And even though it's not necessarily considered a deadly weapon, as a parolee, he wasn't allowed to be in possession of any weapons. So unfortunately for him, he was arrested because he had just violated his parole. When this happened, he became very emotional. He asked his parole officer, how long am I going to be locked up? Because remember, he did have a baby on the way and he was very concerned. Detective Larry Hobson was like, you know what? Because we have him detained, why not question him about the missing girls? They didn't have any evidence to connect him to these crimes, but they figured, why not? If anything, they could further rule him out. Well, this interview was taped, so I will be playing portions of it, just so that you can see his demeanor. He was shown pictures of both of the women and said he didn't recognize either of them.
Have you ever met Rachel and Andrea?
No.
Ever see them any place? That like I said, you've had a lot of time to think about it.
I've never actually. And which one's this?
That's Andrea.
Not that I can tell you.
Well, what's interesting is that because he has a past, right? You know what he's done to women before. The detective was like, maybe you can help us out. Maybe you can help profile a person who would do something like this. Take women, Maybe you can provide information as an offender, how they operate when they commit these kind of crimes. And after hours of talking, him and Dobson, they were very comfortable. The rapport was built. Rex was hoping that he could think of someone maybe he'd seen around town or even back in prison that would do something like this. He was racking his brain, trying to think of similar crimes that people have committed, and he got a list of people they should check, which was helpful.
Anybody that you can think of that you would suspect of abducting these 2 women.
Rex did admit a lot of things to Hobson. He talked about the fact that he does still have impulses that are related to forcing women to do things, and he does fantasize about abducting women, but he's worked through all that, meaning he's not going to actually do it, even though he still has the fantasies. When asked what they should do to the person that took Andrea and Rachel when they find him, Rex said they should kill him. And then Hobson took Rex up on that offer to search his truck. It was a blue Ford Ranger pickup, and something stood out. All the carpeting in the back of the truck had been removed, along with the jump seat in back of the passenger seat. It wasn't there. It had been ripped out. Now, that's not exactly criminal or that strange. People sometimes remove portions of their cars for more room, and he did lug items around for his work. But they were also searching his property, and the investigators there found the seat that used to be in the truck. And if you've ever seen these before, it's the smaller folding seat that's right behind the passenger and the driver's side. It folds, so you can kind of make more room, and then you can fold it down for someone to sit in. But what was interesting when they found it, it was really clean compared to the other parts of his car. But that still didn't mean he was connected to a crime. Could have been taken out when he first got the vehicle, and then it sat in the back of his house where they found it, not getting as dirty as inside his car, because it was in like a little storage area. But just to do their due diligence, they have it confiscated and sent to the lab for analysis. Now, his house, they took pictures and videos, and I have some. It was in a state of disarray. It did not have electricity. It didn't have cable. It was dirty. The furniture had dust and even leaves all over it. There were all kinds of items scattered around. Food, tons of clutter, a bottle of bleach sitting on the counter, things all over the place. Something that I didn't tell you that I think is important now is back when his parole officer was kind of curious about him possibly being connected, he made a routine visit to this house. This was completely normal, but when Rex answered the door, not only was he limping, but he was wearing a back brace. So David's like, what happened? He points to his rib area, and he said, I was fixing things in my backyard. I fell off the cement wall and I fell into firewood. Well, that was weird. Now, he didn't have any wounds or anything he could see that was suspicious on, where he could see like his arms, his legs, things like that. But this is what initially led him to reach out to authorities, putting all of this together. So now, as David is with the investigators walking through Rex's house, something draws his attention. He just has this gut feeling about a box that's sitting in the kitchen on one of the shelves. Just something about it. He had a hunch. But I don't necessarily believe that it was just a hunch because David knew everything about Rex. And here's where these types of videos are a little bit different than the normal ones I regularly do. I usually mention a perpetrator's name, maybe list a few things about their past. But beyond that, I'm not usually interested in their evil mind, right? But Evil Mind series is different. So let's talk about who Rex is, because this parole officer knew his whole story. It wasn't just intuition that made him believe that Rex was capable of this type of crime. It's because it's exactly the type he liked to commit. Rex Allen Krebs was born January 28th, 1966 in Sandpoint, Idaho. His home life was violent and chaotic from the beginning. And that was due to his father Alan's violent behavior. He would literally throw baby Rex across the room, even tossing him over a car to his mother, Connie. Rex was only 4 years old when his dad's sister, Florence Crawford, was brutally murdered. She was shot in the head and dumped into the trunk of a vehicle. His father said that ever since that day, it seemed like their entire family was cursed, like it was a plague following them around. But his father didn't help because he began drinking heavily after his sister's murder, and he became even more violent. By grade school, Rex was dealing with constant turmoil. He was struggling in school, he was teased, and he was starting to act out in risky ways. His mom finally decided to divorce his father, but then his stepdad, Bob, entered his world and began to verbally and also physically mistreat him. He would call him names like little bastard. He would hit him, especially for accidentally going to the bathroom in his pants. And at this point, he couldn't even control his bowels. He had to wear diapers to school at 5 years old. Bob, of course, didn't get along with Rex's dad, Alan, to the point where they almost had a shootout in the front yard. And Alan literally used his little boy Rex as a shield, even taunting Bob, saying, "Go ahead, try to shoot me, I dare you." Rex was 8. His mother was no better. She was a raging alcoholic, and so was Bob. And they would leave all their kids in the car while they went to bars and drank. They would leave them all alone for hours on end. Sometimes, one of the children that wasn't even the legal age to drive would take the car back so at least they could be at home in a familiar place. Rex goes back to live with Alan when he's 10 because him and Bob weren't getting along either. And his father begins mistreating him once again, which affected his self-esteem and really affected the way he interacted socially at school. He's known as a loner and an outcast. He was dirty, unbathed, and kids would make fun of him constantly. He also started to misbehave at school, started fights with other kids, didn't get along with his teachers, and he would run away from home all the time when he was about 12. When he turned 13, though, things got criminal. He broke into one of his neighbors' houses, and when he was found, he was in their young daughter's closet touching himself. I wonder, honestly, what kind of things were being done to him as a child physically, if you know what I mean, because he was exhibiting very inappropriate behavior and he had to have learned that somewhere or saw it. And that is very, very sad. And although the court ordered Rex to undergo psychological treatment, his father only allowed him to go once. Now, reports around this time did indicate he had poor impulse control, substance abuse issues, and about 1 year later, he was caught making very obscene phone calls to residents of their neighborhood. He was put in a state hospital and then into a boys' home in 1981 after he was caught breaking into another home, stealing items and $1,000. After being in treatment, he did show some improvement, but then he goes back to live with his dad, and he's taken to the hospital for head injuries. He says he had fallen out of a truck. However, this was back when he was with his father, so they believed that the mistreatment had started again. But Rex, when he was interviewed, he said nothing happened to him that his father did to him, but that's probably because he was scared. He ends up running away again, and honestly, I can't blame him. But he was up to no good. He apparently purposely tried to derail a train from a track, just so he could see what would happen. Luckily, no one was killed. However, the conductor was injured. At this point, he's committed to a state hospital, and he finally gets some treatment. But it's sad because his father was glad he was in the hospital because he said he couldn't handle him anymore. It's like he needed a babysitter, but he was the reason, if you really break it down, why Rex became the way he did. I'm not going to say he was the only person responsible, but he was one of them. However, Rex does make improvements. He was even named Gentleman of the Month while in the boys' group home in 1982. He was 16 at the time. Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but they release him and he goes back to live with his dad at 17. And of course, the mistreatment happens all over again. I kept asking myself, why do they keep giving him to his dad? Why not even foster care? Anything would be better. Not even a year later, it gets worse. He's 18. He's drunk. He attacks and attempts to violate a 12-year-old. He's charged with a misdemeanor, and this time he has to spend 3 months in jail. As soon as he's out again, he goes back and spends 3 years in prison for breaking into a car and stealing it. So Grand Theft Auto. This time, after he's released, he's 21. It's 1987, and he moves to California now to live with his mother, Connie. She's on her 4th husband. And while he's living there trying to get his life back together, he met a 17-year-old girl. They start living together in his mom's garage. Later, they get engaged. But then she finds out about his past and she breaks it off. He starts committing back-to-back attacks on women after this. According to the court documents that I found in 1987, he broke into a home where a woman was sleeping with her daughter. He climbed on top of this woman. With a knife in his hand and a screwdriver, he pinned her to the bed. He forced the woman to take the screaming child into another room, and after she hid her daughter, Rex tied this woman up, and when she didn't cooperate, he became violent. He hit her head into a wall, he tried to stab her, and when he failed to injure this woman, she reached for his knife, he bit her finger, and then he finally fled. She had to have surgery to repair the damage to her hand. But she would never regain full function of that finger ever again, and his violence only escalated. On May 24th of 1987, he stalked a woman from a bar. He got into her home, I told you a little bit about this, and when she woke up, a man's hand was over her mouth and a knife that he got from her kitchen was on her throat. He tied her hands behind her back, he cut off all of her clothing, and he asked her if her kitchen knives were sharp enough to cut her throat. And when she replied she didn't know, he threw the knife aside, pulled out a large hunting knife out from his pants, hogtied her, violated her, and then fled. He only left because he heard her roommate coming home, apparently. So we don't even know what he would have done. And then a month later, on June 14th, he broke into yet another home, attempted the same thing on a second woman, and he was caught. He pleads guilty to both of these crimes, and that is how he's sentenced to 20 years in prison. But he only serves 10 because of good behavior and work time credit. In prison, he's described as a model prisoner. Court documents indicate, though, there was no counseling programs offered to offenders like this at the time. So he did not work through any of this. He was not truly rehabilitated because they had these people on the bottom of the totem pole. Those were their words in an article I read. These inmates wouldn't have anything to attend. They were the worst of the worst. So I guess nobody cared to help them or try to see if they can be reformed. And he was paroled in 1997, a year before Rachel and Andrea went missing, and he appeared stable. He met Roz, his girlfriend. He worked manual labor at 84 Lumber, as you know, so we're almost full circle here. And in 1998, he was knocked unconscious for days after a bar fight, and people close to him said that later he acted strange. Outwardly, though, he still looked like a guy trying to rebuild his life. Steady job, girlfriend, baby on the way. His girlfriend would even warn him, don't drink because you're not supposed to while you're on parole. And he also tended to get in trouble when he drank. So now we're back at Rex's house, being looked at by investigators. So now you know everything about what his parole officer knew and was trying to connect. They're taking video, they're taking pictures inside. And David is looking at that wooden box. The location itself was suspicious to him. It was in the kitchen where I guess you had to open a cabinet and then it was on a shelf. And it looked kind of hidden in plain sight. When they opened it, they found women's jewelry, girls' names and phone numbers, as well as one very specific item, an 8-ball keychain. Remember Andrea owned a keychain just like this? Now, they do not think this is a coincidence at all. It's a connection. In his truck, there was also what cops referred to as an abduction kit or an R-word kit, duct tape, rope, binoculars. Now, he was already sitting in jail, so what they needed was something more. The keychain, well, those are sold at numerous places. It wasn't going to be enough. And on April 21st, they got it. Remember the seat that was removed from his truck? Well, when the analyst removed the cover from that seat, there was blood underneath on the metal part. It was analyzed, and there was DNA extracted from it that matched Rachel Newhouse. Wow. And I know you're probably not surprised. And Detective Hobson actually showed the keychain to Rex at this point. And Rex is like, oh, you want me to touch that with my bare hands? And Hobson's like, I've been touching all over it with my bare hands. It's fine. My fingerprints are all over the thing. But he asked him, do you know who this belongs to? Rex didn't answer. And finally, Hobson was like, it's Andrea's. And you know where we found it? In a box at your house. He's like, no way. He's like, I got that back in 1996. Well, Hobson had already done his research. He's like, no. These particular ones weren't manufactured until 1998. And Rex was like, well, that's strange.
Remember last time we talked about the 8-ball?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to touch that and put my fingerprints on it?
Well, my fingerprints are all over it. You know whose 8-ball that is? It's Andrea's.
I mean, of course, Hobson doesn't know for sure if this truly was Andrea's keychain, but he was sure about the next thing. Hobson questioned him about the jump seat, and Rex confirmed he only had one in the back of his truck. Hobson asked him, where is the other one? And Rex told him it's in the back of his house. And Hobson was like, that's exactly where we found it. And what do you think we did with it? Rex just shrugged. Hobson was like, we sent it over to the lab. And Rex was just like, okay. He said, guess whose blood we found on it? Rachel Newhouse.
We sent the whole chair over to the lab, Fresno.
Okay.
You're familiar with DNA, I'm sure, the results and so forth. And guess whose blood that is? Rachel Newhouse. And again, I'm not making it up, Rex. I wished I was.
But Hobson wouldn't stop asking him questions. He asked him, "Are you responsible for their disappearance? Are we going to find them alive?"
I see the wheels turning, Rex. I'd like to be able to put closure on this for those families that have been dealing with this since November. Rex, look at me. I'd like to hear the story. I'd like to be able to go out and find Rachel, find Andrea. Okay, are you responsible for the disappearance of both girls? Are we going to find either girl alive?
After about an hour of silence, he was finally taken back to his cell. But he wasn't quiet for long. By the very next morning, he wanted to talk to Hobson. He said he hadn't slept all night. And actually, Hobson said he didn't either. They were both thinking about this case. They went back into the interview room because Rex had something to say. Hobson decides to cut to the chase. He's like, "Listen, I'm going to make this really easy for you. Answer this question. Are you responsible for the disappearance of both girls?" And Rex nodded his head and also said yes. Hobson then asked, "Are we going to find either girl alive?" And Rex said no.
Are we going to find either girl alive? That was a no? Okay.
It was absolutely devastating. And it's what they already thought was the truth, but hearing it from their killer, that's a whole other experience. Literally looking into the eyes of a monster. But they had their confession. They had their evidence tying him to these crimes, and they even got a literal minute-to-minute breakdown of exactly what happened to both of these girls. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. But at the very least, I'm glad that this monster came clean, because there are people like Brian Koberger, for instance, that wouldn't. Now, I am going to read this right from the court document because I don't want to get any of these facts incorrect. So if it sounds like I'm reading it, I'm sorry, but I do want to try to go as word for word as possible. However, I don't like using last names of people. So instead of Newhouse, I'm going to say Rachel. Instead of Krebs, I'm going to say Rex. And instead of Crawford, I'm going to say Andrea. This is what he said happened. It starts at 8:30 p.m. on November the 12th of 1998. He drank 6 or 7 shots of whiskey. At around midnight, he sees Rachel Newhouse walking down the street in San Luis Obispo. He could tell she was drunk. He kept following her for several blocks when he told Hobson he had a premonition that Rachel was going to walk across the Jennifer Street Bridge. So he drove up to the bridge parking lot, parked his truck, walked to the top of the bridge, and as Rachel walked behind him, he turned around and was wearing a hoodie and a Halloween skull mask that he had in his car since Halloween. He hit her in the jaw with his fist, and when she screamed, he picked her up and threw her down on her back. Then he hit her again, knocking her unconscious, dragged her by the hair down the stairs. And at this point, she was bleeding from the back of the head and about the face. When he reached his truck, he put the still unconscious Rachel behind the front passenger seat in the area where the jump seat was located. He got rope from the bed of his truck and tied her hands behind her back. Then he drove along railroad tracks for 200 yards where he stopped, and he used the same rope to tie her legs. Finally, he reached into her pants, ripped off her panties, stuffed them in her mouth, and tied the rope around her mouth. Beside the road that led to Rex's residence was an abandoned cabin. He drove to the cabin, carried Rachel inside, removed her pants, and violated her. That's my word. She was conscious by this time and cursing at him. After he did this to her, he tied her legs, hog-tied her legs to her hands, stuffed her panties back in her mouth, all the while wearing the Halloween mask. Then he drove up to his residence, left Rachel in the cabin tied up and lying on her stomach. Side note, in this type of position, with these ropes the way that they are, you can't hardly move, because if your head goes forward, the rope is going to get tighter around your neck. And if your feet fall down, the rope is also going to get tighter. Now back to the document. He returned 15 or 20 minutes later and found Rachel dead. He told Hobson that when he left, the rope had been tied around her neck and was not in a position that would have prevented her from breathing. Hobson asked whether Rex was saying that Rachel struggled and had caused her own strangulation. He responded that, or her legs relaxed or something. I don't know. Rex told Hobson that he panicked, put her body behind the cabin, and went home. The next morning, Rex drove his truck past the spot where he had been cutting wood and dug a grave. He returned home and at some point cleaned blood from his truck. When he was unable to remove all the blood, he cut portions of the carpet and the jump seat and put the stained jump seat in his house. Between 11 p.m. and midnight, he put Rachel Newhouse's body in the back of his truck, drove to where he had dug the grave, and buried it. That's what the document says, it. She was still tied up, and he put hog wire on top of her before putting dirt over it so that no animals could get to her. Wow, even reading it from a court document, it's horrific. It's terrible. I just can't help but think these poor women. Hodson wasn't done yet. Now that he's got him talking, he wasn't going to stop there, so we asked what happened to Andrea. And again, I'm reading from a document unless otherwise stated, and it said that Rex stated that the first time he saw her, he was driving by her house as she was getting out of her car. He followed her back to the house, got out of his truck, and looked at her through a small gap at the bottom of the curtains on a window. He left after a few minutes, and over the next following days, Rex twice returned to Andrea's house to watch her. Each time, he was intoxicated. Finally, Rex returned for a third time, knowing that he was going to abduct her, and again, he was intoxicated. Rex was not certain what time he went to her house, but it could have been as late as 2 or 3 a.m. Rex found a small bathroom window that was not latched. He removed the screen and crawled feet first into the shower stall. He heard his ribs going through the window. Rex told Hobson that he was getting ready to go out the bathroom door. He said, "The only thing I was thinking of is leaving right then," when Andrea opened the bathroom door wearing a t-shirt and underwear. He punched her, kicked her against the wall, and kept punching her, causing her to lose consciousness. He hog-tied her with a rope he had brought with him, put duct tape across her mouth, went upstairs and got 2 pillowcases, and although he was wearing pantyhose over his head, he pulled a pillowcase over his head and tied it so she could not identify him. He put CDs and some of Andrea's clothing in the other pillowcase. He also took her VCR, videotapes, movies, and her keys with him with the 8-ball keychain, which he put in his truck. When Rex returned to his house, Andrea had regained consciousness and was struggling. He put her back in his truck, went back to her house to clean up the blood. Then he drove her to the abandoned cabin and left her on a couch and drove home, drank more whiskey, and as it was starting to get light, he drove to the woodpile to chop wood so that his landlord's daughter, Deborah, would see him when she went to work. After Deborah left, Rex brought Andrea from the cabin into his residence. He removed some of the rope, but he left her hands tied together and kept the pillowcase and the duct tape in place. Now, these are going to be my words because I have to say it this way. He had his way with her in both areas of her body, if that makes sense to you. And then it says, he did this on the bed, tied her feet together, went to the kitchen for more liquor and coffee, then fell asleep on the couch. When he woke up, about an hour or so later, he replaced the pillowcase with a bandana blindfold, removed the duct tape, and she asked him why he was doing this. And she also asked him to stop and pleaded to please let her go and cried. Side note, if I was her mother, reading this or knowing that this happened to my daughter, it is just so heartbreaking to think about. It's like you want to know, but at the same time, knowing is also so terrible. But he said that he did not say anything to her. And again, he had his way with her over the coffee table, leaving her hands tied and her legs untied. He clothed her with a sweatshirt and sweatpants that he brought from her house. He put her back in his bed and again went to sleep on the couch. Rex was awakened by noises and saw Andrea coming out of the bedroom without the blindfold. He threw her to the ground, strangled her to death with a rope, and he moved her body to the bedroom, drank more whiskey, and then dug a grave in his yard and buried her. Rex said he disposed of everything that he had taken except the 8-ball keychain, a second black sweatshirt, and the CDs. He threw the VCR and the videotapes, which were in a garbage bag near the road, and burned everything else. Side note, he told Hobson that he had no intention of killing either one of these women. It was just unfortunate, according to him, that apparently Rachel had moved too much and strangled herself, and Andrea had decided to take the blindfold off, and once she saw his face, he was forced to kill her. He also admitted that he tried getting into Andrea's front and back door to her apartment, but they were both locked, so his last resort was the window. And of course, that's why he was wearing the brace when his parole officer came there. And you know what's sad? That all she was trying to do was give her cat some fresh air. And she heard Rex. That's why she came to the bathroom. She thought that something happened to her cat. So she went to go check on her cat. She comes through the door and she's attacked. Now, I find it hard to believe in his statement that he was about to leave before she came through the door. The way he's putting it, and this just made me so angry, he's almost like, well, she came in, she's only wearing a t-shirt and her underwear, like she's asking for it in her own home. I was sickened. And I have to say, new fear unlocked because the window that he crawled through was the type of window that nobody would think would be dangerous if you just cracked it open. Because who is going to fit through that? A man determined to get inside your house, that's who. Hobson asked him what he was feeling when he was tightening the ropes around her neck. And he said he was angry at himself and he was angry at her. And Hobson was like, were you angry at Andrea because it was partially her fault? And he said, no, nothing could be Andrea's fault. She was bravely trying to escape. And it's sad. But this poor girl could not see without her glasses or contacts on. She was basically legally blind, they said. It's bad enough that she's got a blindfold on. She's in an unknown place. All of this stuff has happened to her. She's trying to escape. She takes the blindfold off. She doesn't have her glasses with her because they were left behind. She was sleeping when this man came in. She couldn't see. And she's trying to get away. I just wish she would have gotten out of there. It's so sad. If you can relate to everything around you being completely blurry and how scared you would be in the circumstance, it's terrible. And then when it came to Rachel, there were things I wanted to say. For example, he body slammed her onto the concrete on that bridge. That's why there was such a big pool of blood there. And the fact he was wearing a Halloween mask on Friday the 13th is terrifying. That is a real life nightmare. And I don't believe for a minute that he did not deliberately strangle her. As a matter of fact, in one of the interviews after he confessed, Rex said that Rachel was cursing at him. And the more she cursed, the angrier he got. And Hobson asked him, what do you do when you get mad? What do you want to do? And he's like, he used the R word, but he's like, I want to violate her. And then once he does, he's not angry anymore. So this gives you the way a person like this mind works. And there were a few other things I wanted to say that he said about Andrea. He said that he was acting out a fantasy with her. It was pleasure and dominance and control. That's part of his fantasy. That's why he used the plastic restraints, because there were plastic restraints on her, because they were better for control. And when she saw his face, it took away the rest of the fantasy, and that's why he had to kill her. Hobson asked a lot more questions. I mean, these interviews went on for hours and hours, but I picked out a couple of things that I did think were worth mentioning. But he said, if you were going to let these girls go, how did you plan to get away and not be caught if you didn't even use protection? You didn't use a condom. He said his plan was to wash them in the bathtub and use a bottle to wash his DNA out of them. He told Hobson that most of his fantasies involved tying up his victims, cutting their clothes off, and being able to dominate them and repeatedly violate them. He didn't want to hurt either of them, he said. He was actually sick and angry at himself for doing what he did. And he said when he saw flyers around town with their faces on it, he became physically ill and he felt sorry for their families and for the girls. Do you believe that? Do you believe that he could have two sides? Let me know in the comments. And after he had just killed 2 innocent women, he was playing house with his girlfriend, planning to propose, planning to get married, have a family together. He has a kid on the way, and it blows my mind because it does mean he can compartmentalize being a murderer and also being a doting boyfriend. It's like a real Jekyll and Hyde. And I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but sometimes I wonder what his girlfriend would think. Like, what do you think to yourself if you're this woman? You know he's killed other women once you find out. Why didn't he kill her? What was different? That would be what I would be thinking. It would just be a natural extension to everything that happened. And we'll get to that because I have more to say. Even though he confessed, there's still more to come because I haven't even told you about the bodies and how they were found. Well, of course, they wanted Rex to show them where they were, and he agreed. The next day, he took police out there and they videotaped this process, and I'm going to be playing some of that for you while I'm telling you. They went up to the canyon, and first, about a mile from his house, there's an area that's covered with leaves and branches, and he points and he says, Rachel's in there. They make sure to mark it with crime scene tape, as you can see in this official photo from the police department. And then after that, and they leave, they're going to come back, but they want to go find Andrea and locate her. And it turns out she's actually on Rex's property. They make their way out there. They cordon off everything. The place is desolate. It's in the middle of nowhere. And he purposely wanted to be in a place like this, and I think you know why. Even if these girls escaped, he would have had an advantage. He knows this area better than them. You couldn't even find your way around out here. It's completely pitch black at night. There are no streetlights, nothing. There's hardly any neighbors. And if you look on Google Maps, it's just trees. He liked it. He could hide out there. It was the perfect place to hide bodies to. Andrea was only buried about 30 feet from Rex's front door. The teams were sent out there to extract both of their remains, which would undergo autopsies and also confirm their identification, their cause and manner of death. But Rex wasn't done talking. But this time, to the people that mattered most to this monster. And I don't know how to make that make sense. I don't know. But he wanted to talk to his girlfriend and his best friend before they saw what he did in the news. And you might wonder why police let him do this. You do have to make compromises sometimes. He did give them a lot of information. And I guess they figured we're just going to let him do this. And also, I think for his girlfriend and friend, the cops were thinking about them as well. Like, it's going to be a big bombshell. When I saw this, though, I couldn't believe it. He's holding onto his girlfriend's hand, and he said, I did what they accused me of. And his girlfriend could be here saying, oh my God. And his friend was like, did you give him all the information they need? And he's like, yes.
I did what they accused me of.
Did you tell them everything they need to know?
His girlfriend starts to cry, totally understandable. And he's like a spectacle to me because I'm analyzing this part because he's comforting her. He's got his arm around her. He's trying to console her as she's crying, as she's saying, why? Why would you do this?
What?
Oh my God. No. Rex, please. Why did you do that? Why?
His friend was patting him on the back. He's like, it's okay. Something's wrong inside Rex. And he starts to cry. And Rex responded that something's been wrong inside ever since he was little.
It's okay. Something's wrong inside, okay?
Something's been wrong inside me since I was little.
I don't feel bad for him. I feel bad for the child version of him. I do. I feel bad for his girlfriend, pregnant with his child, a confessed murderer. It must be confusing trying to reconcile a man who's always been kind to her doing something like this. This was before the day when you could easily go on your computer and do a background check. There weren't sites like Been Verified. It's kind of surprising to me that she couldn't have known he had a criminal record. But I still feel bad for this woman. He made other statements that he's nothing but an animal and that he didn't deserve to live and that nothing could justify what he had done. But none of that mattered. 2 women were gone from their families forever. And when Gail found out that Andrea had been found but was no longer alive, she lost it. She was completely heartbroken. She couldn't believe it was true. She was devastated. She would never get to see her daughter again. She knew that Andrea wanted to get married, have a family one day, and children. She even wrote about it in a class project recently before she was killed. And now that's something she'll never get to do. All because a man wanted his way with her, a woman who believed in saving herself for her future husband. And to think, this man just saw her getting out of her car and going into her house, something that all of us do every single day. And the same can be said about Rachel's family. They did keep a lower profile the entire investigation, but her sister Ashley spoke out afterward and said they could not believe this could happen to their family. And she was so sad she never got to say goodbye to her big sister. Ashley said if she could say one thing to her, if she saw her again, she would tell her she loved her and how much she missed her, and that life isn't the same without her. But Ashley's hoping that her sister's story can help someone else. And I always hope that too. I hope that these videos somehow can help someone, whether it's the smallest thing, like taking more precautions when you're going places, not going alone, keeping in touch, telling people where you're going, where you are. But back to this story. Rachel and Andrea were exhumed with Dr. George Sturbens, a forensic pathologist, observing. He was the medical examiner that was responsible for determining the cause and manner of death. And I'm again going to read this straight from the report. With Rachel's body first. She had been under the ground longer, and it was Rachel's body that was in an advanced state of decomposition. She had a shirt that had been cut in half up the back and a bra with shoulder straps pulled down from her shoulders. She had on no other clothing. 2 areas of her scalp were more decomposed, indicating that they had been injured, and dried fluid was on top of her head, and it was consistent with blood. Rachel was still tied up, and the doctor believed that her cause of death was asphyxiation. The decomposition had also prevented him from determining whether Rachel suffered any trauma to her pelvic area. Now, when it came to Andrea's body, which had been buried at least for a month, the report states, Andrea Crawford's body was not as decomposed as Rachel Newhouse's body, although the level of decomposition precluded a determination of whether her pelvic area, back and front, those are my words, were bruised. She was wearing a black sweatshirt with a Hard Rock Cafe logo and black sweatpants. A blindfold made from a bandana covered her eyes and nose. A rope circled her neck 2 1/2 times and was also wrapped around her torso and extremities. 2 black flex ties were tied around her wrists, and a 3rd flex tie connected them and passed through the rope. There were 2 lacerations inside her mouth that were consistent with a blow by a fist to the face. There was also an area of bruising on her scalp. The doctor concluded that her death was asphyxia by ligature strangulation. This was also in the report. It stated that on April 23rd, a search of the abandoned cabin was done, and there was a large blood stain on the pad underneath the cushions of the couch. And the next day, another search of Rex's home led to the discovery of those black flex ties that matched the ones on Andrea's wrists. They also found some keys about 45 feet from his home, and those keys unlocked Andrea's front door. And Rachel's blood was also found on the couch in Rex's home. Now, Rex's attorneys, they wanted the district attorney to take a plea deal, and Rex would plead guilty, and then he would get life in prison without parole. But they were like, oh no. You're going to trial because this is a death sentence case. And they did. But before that, his girlfriend Roz came to say goodbye. I read this article on the Fresno Bee. One of the reporters decided to go talk to Rex for an interview on April 24th. And when she walked in, she noticed a young woman who had also signed in to see him that day. It was Roslyn. They started talking. She said she was just coming there to say goodbye, but she didn't even know what to say, and that this is not the Rex that she knew. Now, because her face had been blurred, I have to tell you, I'm a curious person. I was interested in who his girlfriend was, and we did get a peek of that, but we also got more of her description of like what she looked like, what kind of person she was, and that's important to me because I am overanalyzing this. What I said before, how come he didn't kill her? Like, what was different? What was she like? It was just curiosity. This reporter said she was 5'3", 110 pounds. She wore black glasses covering big brown eyes. She was casually but stylishly dressed in white linen pants and a windbreaker. She was Caucasian and African American. She had black, curly hair, shoulder length. She was visibly pregnant, and the reporter asked her name, and she said Rosalind. She looked scared, and that's when the reporter put her hand on her shoulder, and Rosalind started crying. And she said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't believe this. I was in that house a lot. Those poor girls. I'm going to go back home with my mom. I have to get out of here. The reporter also met up with Rosalind after she came out, when she had already spoken to Rex. And when she saw the reporter, she said that his eyes were dead and that he fooled a lot of people. I am sorry that he fooled this woman too, but I am glad that her and her unborn child were not harmed. Now, I don't know what she did after this. I didn't look into information because I didn't want to go and pry. I think sometimes survivors of these things do deserve privacy, but that must be so hard. And after it was confirmed that both Andrea and Rachel were dead, the community created memorials for them at Jennifer Street Bridge and at Andrea's home, and they brought flowers and other mementos to remember both of them. Forever 20, forever college students. There was a memorial for Andrea. Over 600 people came, and her uncle spoke about her and her legacy. And it was sad. He cried the entire time. He talked about all of the things that I told you that she loved. Animals, horses, her dreams for the future, her summer plans that she'll never get to do with her best friend. Andrea's grandfather, Don, also had some words for Rex. He said, sorry he's not going to bring back Rachel and Andrea. I don't care what he says. He asked him, am I a monster? No. You're a piece of slime. Pure, unadulterated slime. He hoped that Rex would be put to death, saying that I hope when it gets down to it, the jury will fry him. If they don't, they have no heart. But as for the trial, I think you realize there was more than enough evidence. I do not have to go into the entire trial and the theories and the arguments. This man confessed. Everything was set out. However, the defense attorneys did have to do their job. They had family members come up and talk about his childhood. That's fair. I understand, and I'm sad about what happened to him as a child, but he had a choice. Some may argue he didn't. I can't give an opinion on that because I'm not a professional, but the jury did. They found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Some of his family members did not like that. They said, he's a changed man. He's been in prison now. He found God. He can help people. His life is worth something. Even his half-sister said that. His father said he had a tender side, but he must have had a demon in him. And as for Rex's mother, she said, I hate to say it, but maybe someone needs to put him out of his misery. Wow. His own mother. That's saying something. But then again, we do kind of know what kind of person she was. Rex himself wanted death. He said he hoped that he would be given the death penalty. 2 girls are dead. He said, if I'm not a monster, then what am I? Rex remains on death row. And in case you were wondering, because I know I was, and some of you will be, Kristin Smart, who disappeared in 1996 before Rachel and Andrea, she was not a victim of Rex Krebs. However, 27 years later, in May of 2023, the last person to have been seen with her, Paul Flores, who was always a suspect from the beginning, was finally convicted of her murder. And that case is so deep in and of itself, it deserves its very own video, but unbelievably, technology, DNA, police work, and a podcast brought the truth to light. I'll save it for another day. Maybe I'll do it as a bonus video, but until then, I do want to thank you for being here for Andrea and Rachel's story. I will see you in my next video. Bye.